The stagecoach wheels had barely stopped turning when Penelope Kincaid stumbled out onto the dusty street of Shafter, Texas, her face pale and her hands trembling as she clutched the few belongings she had left in this world. It was late summer in 1878, and the heat pressed down on the small cattle town like a heavy wool blanket. Penelope wiped her forehead with the back of her hand, squinting against the harsh sunlight that made everything shimmer and dance. She had been traveling for 3 weeks straight, running from a life that had crumbled around her like dried adobe. Her father had died 6 months ago, leaving debts that swallowed everything they owned. Her mother had passed when Penelope was just a child, and now at 22 years old, she found herself truly alone for the first time. The town of Shafter sprawled before her in shades of brown and beige, wooden buildings lining a wide main street that seemed designed to accommodate cattle drives. She could see a general store, a saloon, what looked like a boarding house, and further down, a blacksmith shop with smoke rising from its chimney despite the oppressive heat. Penelope adjusted the worn carpetbag in her hand and started walking toward the boarding house, her boots kicking up small clouds of dust with each step. She had exactly $14 to her name and a letter of recommendation for a teaching position that might not even exist anymore. The letter was 3 months old, and out here, things changed quickly. "Miss, you all right there?" a voice called out from behind her. She turned to see a man in his mid-20s dismounting from a paint horse tied outside the general store. He was tall and lean, built like someone who spent his days working under the sun. His dark brown hair curled slightly beneath a weathered hat, and his eyes were an unexpected shade of green that caught the light as he approached. He wore the typical garb of a working cowboy: dusty denim pants, a faded blue shirt with the sleeves rolled up to reveal sun-bronzed forearms, and a bandana tied loosely around his neck. "I'm fine, thank you," Penelope said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "Just arrived on the stage." "Can see that," he said, and there was something gentle in his voice that made her shoulders relax slightly. "Owen Hartley. I work at the Double R Ranch just outside town. You look a bit lost, if you don't mind my saying." "Penelope Kincaid," she replied, shifting her bag to her other hand. "And I suppose I am, in a way. I'm looking for the school. I was told there might be a teaching position available." Owen's expression shifted, something like concern crossing his features. "Ah, well, there's good news and bad news about that. The good news is we do have a school. The bad news is the last teacher left about 2 weeks ago. Married a merchant and moved to San Antonio. The town's been trying to find a replacement." Despite her exhaustion, Penelope felt a spark of hope. "Then perhaps I'm not too late. Do you know who I should speak with about the position?" "That'd be Mrs. Garrison. She runs the boarding house and sits on the school board. Come on, I'll walk you over there." Owen gestured down the street, falling into step beside her as they walked. "Where are you coming from, if you don't mind my asking?" "Kansas, originally. My father and I had a small farm near Lawrence. But after he passed, well, there wasn't much left." Penelope wasn't sure why she was being so forthcoming with this stranger, but something about his steady presence made the words come easier. "I saw an advertisement for a teacher needed in West Texas." It seemed like as good a place as any to start over. Owen nodded thoughtfully. "Starting over. That's something I understand. I came out here 5 years ago from Missouri. Sometimes a fresh start is exactly what a person needs." They reached the boarding house, a 2-story structure that looked better maintained than some of the other buildings in town. The paint was fresh enough that it hadn't completely faded, and flower boxes with hardy desert plants adorned the front windows. Owen held the door open for her, and they stepped into the relative coolness of the interior. A woman in her 50s looked up from where she was wiping down a table. She was plump and pleasant-looking, with gray-streaked brown hair pulled back in a practical bun. "Owen Hartley, what brings you to town in the middle of the week?" "Afternoon, Mrs. Garrison. Came in for supplies, but I found something better. This here is Miss Penelope Kincaid. She's come all the way from Kansas about the teaching position." Mrs. Garrison's face lit up immediately. "Is that so? Well, praise be, we've been worried sick about the children missing too much schooling." She came forward, wiping her hands on her apron. "I'm Martha Garrison. Please sit down, both of you. Miss Kincaid, you look about ready to fall over." Penelope sank gratefully into one of the chairs, realizing just how bone-tired she actually was. Owen remained standing, hat in hand, but Mrs. Garrison waved him into a seat as well before disappearing into what was presumably the kitchen. "She'll bring tea," Owen said with a small smile. "It's what she does whenever anyone looks even slightly in need of mothering." "I won't complain about that," Penelope admitted. She studied Owen's face, noting the way sun lines crinkled at the corners of his eyes, the honest openness in his expression. "Have you lived in Shafter long?" "5 years, like I said. Came here with nothing but the horse I rode in on and got hired at the Double R. Worked my way up from ranch hand to foreman about a year ago. It's good work, honest work." He leaned back in his chair, relaxed. "The town's small, but folks are decent. Could be a good place to call home, if you're looking for that." Before Penelope could respond, Mrs. Garrison returned with a tea tray and a plate of cookies. She settled herself across from Penelope with a businesslike air. "Now then, tell me about your qualifications. Have you taught before?" "Yes, madam. I taught at a small school in Kansas for 3 years. I have experience with students ranging from 6 to 14 years old, and I can teach reading, writing, arithmetic, geography, and history. I also have some musical training if that's useful." Penelope pulled a folded paper from her bag. "This is a letter of recommendation from the school board in Lawrence." Mrs. Garrison read the letter carefully, her expression growing more pleased with each line. "This is excellent, Miss Kincaid. Very thorough. I'll need to convene the school board officially, but I can tell you right now that you're exactly what we're looking for. When can you start?" The relief that washed over Penelope was so intense she felt lightheaded. "As soon as you need me." "Monday, then." "That gives you a few days to settle in and prepare. The schoolhouse is just at the edge of town. Small, only about 20 students on a good day, but they're eager learners. As for lodging, I have a room here that comes with the teaching position. Meals included. The town provides a salary of $25 a month. It wasn't a fortune, but it was steady and it was hers. Penelope felt tears prick at her eyes but blinked them back. "That sounds more than fair, Mrs. Garrison. Thank you." "No need to thank me, dear. We're the ones who should be grateful. Now let me show you to your room so you can rest." Mrs. Garrison stood, and Penelope followed suit. Owen rose as well, settling his hat back on his head. "I should get those supplies and head back to the ranch. Miss Kincaid, it was a pleasure meeting you." "Welcome to Shafter." "Thank you, Mr. Hartley. I appreciate your help." Penelope extended her hand, and Owen shook it gently. His hand was calloused from hard work but warm, and the contact sent an unexpected flutter through her chest. "Just Owen, please. I'm sure I'll see you around town." He nodded to Mrs. Garrison and headed out, the door closing softly behind him. Mrs. Garrison led Penelope up a narrow staircase to the second floor. The room she showed her was small but clean, with a narrow bed covered in a colorful quilt, a washstand with a pitcher and basin, a small wardrobe, and a writing desk positioned beneath the window. The window itself looked out over the main street, offering a view of the comings and goings of the town. "It's perfect," Penelope said sincerely. "Supper's at 6. For now, get some rest. You look like you need it." Mrs. Garrison patted her arm kindly and left, closing the door quietly behind her. Penelope set her bag down and sank onto the bed, finally allowing herself to feel the full weight of the past weeks. She had made it. Against all odds, she had traveled halfway across the country to a place she'd never seen, and she had found not just a job but a lifeline. She lay back on the bed, staring up at the ceiling, and allowed herself a few silent tears of relief before exhaustion pulled her into a deep, dreamless sleep. The next few days passed in a blur of activity. Penelope met with the school board officially on Friday, a process that was more of a formality than anything else given how desperate they were for a teacher. She spent Saturday cleaning and organizing the schoolhouse, which had gathered dust in the 2 weeks since the previous teacher's departure. It was a simple structure, one large room with wooden benches, a teacher's desk at the front, and a blackboard that needed a fresh coat of paint. But it had good light from the tall windows, and someone had clearly cared for it once. Sunday morning found her attending the small church service, where she met more of the townspeople. They were a mix of ranchers, farmers, shopkeepers, and their families, most of them friendly and curious about the new teacher. Several parents introduced themselves and their children, who ranged from shy to boisterous. She didn't see Owen at the service, but she found herself looking for him anyway, which annoyed her slightly. She had more important things to focus on than a cowboy with green eyes, no matter how kind he had been. Monday morning arrived bright and warm. Penelope dressed carefully in her best day dress, a sensible gray cotton with a white collar, and pinned her dark blonde hair up in a neat bun. She walked to the schoolhouse early, her heart beating fast with a mixture of nerves and excitement. The students began arriving around 8 o'clock, some walking from town, others arriving on horseback or in wagons driven by parents. They filed in with the cautious curiosity of children meeting a new authority figure, taking their seats on the benches and whispering among themselves. Penelope stood at the front of the room, taking a deep breath before she began. "Good morning. My name is Miss Kincaid, and I'm very pleased to be your new teacher. I know you've had some disruption in your schooling recently, and I want to assure you that we're going to have a good year together. But first, I'd like to get to know each of you. Let's go around the room, and I want you to tell me your name, your age, and one thing you're interested in learning more about." The introductions took the better part of an hour, but they were invaluable. She learned that Tommy Prescott, age 7, wanted to know more about trains. Sarah Michaels, age 10, was fascinated by geography and wanted to learn about faraway places. Jacob Holt, age 14, was more interested in ranching than books, but admitted he needed to improve his arithmetic for business purposes. By the end of the first day, Penelope was exhausted but satisfied. The children had been responsive, and while there would certainly be challenges ahead, she felt confident she could reach them. She was locking up the schoolhouse when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Looking up, she saw Owen riding toward her on his paint horse, a leather satchel hanging from his saddle. "Evening, Miss Kincaid," he called out, swinging down from the horse with easy grace. "How was your first day?" "Tiring, but good," she replied, surprised by how glad she was to see him. "What brings you to town?" "Actually, I came to see you. Boss sent me with a proposition." Owen opened the satchel and pulled out a slate and some chalk. "We've got 3 children at the ranch, children of some of the hands. Their parents want them in school, but it's a long ride into town every day. The ranch owner, Mr. Robbins, was wondering if you might be willing to come out to the ranch once a week, say Saturday mornings, to work with them separate. He'd pay you extra, of course, $5 a week." Penelope considered this. The extra money would be helpful, and it seemed wrong for children to miss out on education because of distance. "How far is the ranch?" about an hour's ride. I could come fetch you Saturday mornings and bring you back in the afternoon. The children are good kids, ages 8, 9, and 11. They can read a little but need more instruction. All right, Penelope decided. I'll do it, but I'll need to borrow a horse. I haven't got one of my own. Already thought of that. Mrs. Garrison has a gentle mare she hires out. I checked with her already, and she's willing to let you use her for these trips. Owen's eyes held a warmth that made Penelope's pulse quicken slightly. You've thought of everything, haven't you? I try, he said with a grin. So I'll pick you up this Saturday at 8. I'll be ready. That Saturday morning was cooler, with a pleasant breeze that promised autumn wasn't too far off. Penelope had borrowed a split-riding skirt from Mrs. Garrison and was waiting outside the boarding house when Owen arrived, leading 2 horses. "Morning," he said cheerfully. "This is Daisy. She's about the sweetest-tempered horse you'll ever meet." The mare was a dappled gray with kind eyes, and she stood patiently as Owen helped Penelope mount. Once she was settled, they set off at an easy pace, leaving the town behind. The landscape was beautiful in its own stark way. Rolling hills dotted with mesquite and scrub brush stretched out under an endless blue sky. In the distance, Penelope could see the purple shadows of distant mountains. The air smelled of dust and sage, and the only sounds were the steady clop of hooves and the occasional call of a bird. "It's different from Kansas," Penelope said after a while, "drier, but there's something about it I like." "It grows on you," Owen agreed. He rode easily, completely at home in the saddle. "When I first got here, I thought it was the loneliest place I'd ever seen. But now I can't imagine being anywhere else. There's a freedom to it, a simplicity." "Is that what you were looking for when you left Missouri? Freedom?" Owen was quiet for a moment, his gaze on the horizon. "In a way. My father wanted me to take over the family business, a dry goods store in a little town where everyone knew everyone and everything stayed the same year after year. It wasn't a bad life, but it wasn't the life I wanted. We argued about it for years. Finally, when I turned 20, I just left. Broke my mother's heart, I think, but I had to find my own way." "Do you regret it?" "Sometimes I regret the pain it caused them, but I don't regret the choice." He glanced over at her. "What about you? Any regrets about coming out here?" "It's too soon to tell," Penelope said honestly. "But so far, no. I feel like I'm finally standing on my own feet, making my own way instead of just existing in the wake of other people's decisions." "That's a good feeling," Owen said quietly. The Double R Ranch came into view about 20 minutes later. It was larger than Penelope had expected, with a big ranch house, a bunkhouse, several barns and outbuildings, and corrals filled with horses and cattle. As they rode in, several ranch hands looked up from their work, a few calling out greetings to Owen. A man in his 60s with a weathered face and an impressive mustache came out of the main house to greet them. This was Mr. Robbins, the owner, and he shook Penelope's hand with genuine warmth. "Miss Kincaid, thank you for coming out. The families will be mighty glad to have their children properly taught." The 3 children were waiting in a small room that had been set up as a makeshift classroom in one of the outbuildings. Maria Gonzalez was 8, with dark braids and shy eyes. Timothy Crane was 9, freckled and energetic. And Alina Walsh was 11, serious and clearly the leader of the small group. Penelope spent the next 3 hours working with them, assessing their skills and beginning to develop lesson plans. They were bright children, eager to learn, and the time passed quickly. By the time she was done, she felt the same satisfaction she had felt after her first day at the town school. Owen was waiting when she emerged, having spent the morning working with some of the horses in the breaking pen. "How did it go?" wonderfully. "They're good students." Penelope accepted a cup of water from one of the ranch hands gratefully. Thank you for arranging this. The children thank you. Their parents thank you. Owen tilted his head toward the main house. Mrs. Robbins has lunch ready if you're hungry. It's tradition around here to feed visitors well. Lunch was a hearty meal of beef stew, fresh bread, and apple pie, served in the ranch house dining room. Mrs. Robbins was a small, energetic woman who clearly ran her household with efficient kindness. She asked Penelope questions about the school in town, about her background, and seemed satisfied with the answers. The ride back to town was slower, more relaxed. The heat of the day had settled in, and they let the horses take their time. Owen told her stories about life on the ranch, about ornery cattle and horses with personality, about the camaraderie among the ranch hands and the hard work that kept the place running. "You really love it, don't you?" Penelope observed. "The work, the life out here." "I do," Owen admitted. "There's something honest about it. You work hard and you see the results of your work. You take care of the animals, maintain the land, and it takes care of you in return. Plus, I like the people. They're real, no pretense." "That's rare," Penelope said. "In Kansas, especially toward the end, everyone was so concerned with appearances, with who had what and who owed whom. It was suffocating. Out here, all that matters is whether you do your job and treat people fair. The rest is just noise." As they rode, Penelope found herself increasingly aware of Owen's presence beside her. The way he sat his horse with unconscious grace, the way he spoke with quiet confidence, the way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't paying attention. There was something about him that made her feel both safe and slightly off balance, and she wasn't quite sure what to do with that feeling. They reached Shafter as the sun was beginning to lower in the sky, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. Owen helped her dismount outside the boarding house, his hands steady at her waist. "Thank you for today," Penelope said, suddenly feeling shy. "For arranging the position, for the ride, for the company." "It was my pleasure," Owen replied, and the sincerity in his voice was unmistakable. "Same time next Saturday. Same time." She watched him ride away, leading Daisy back to wherever she was stabled, and felt a curious emptiness when he disappeared from view. The weeks that followed fell into a comfortable rhythm. Monday through Friday, Penelope taught at the town school, working with her students and slowly winning over even the most reluctant learners. Saturday mornings were spent at the ranch, and she found herself looking forward to those days not just for the teaching but for the ride there and back with Owen. They talked about everything during those rides. He told her about growing up in Missouri, about his two sisters and his parents who he still wrote to regularly, despite the rift. She told him about her childhood in Kansas, about her mother's death when she was 10, about the years of just her and her father working the farm until his sudden death from a heart ailment. "You ever feel lonely?" Owen asked one Saturday in early October as they rode beneath a sky so blue it almost hurt to look at. Penelope considered the question carefully. "Sometimes, especially at night when I'm in my room and it's too quiet. I think about how I used to hear my father moving around downstairs, the familiar sounds of home. Now there's just silence." She paused. "But during the day, when I'm teaching or talking with Mrs. Garrison or riding with you, I don't feel lonely at all." "I'm glad," Owen said quietly. "I'd hate to think of you feeling that way." Something in his tone made Penelope look over at him. His expression was serious, his eyes on the path ahead, but there was a tension in his shoulders that suggested he was holding something back. "What about you?" she asked. "Do you get lonely?" "Used to," he admitted. "The bunkhouse is full of men, so you're never really alone, but that's not the same as having someone to really talk to, you know? Someone who understands you." He glanced at her, and the look in his eyes made her breath catch. "That's changed recently, though." Penelope felt heat rise to her cheeks and looked away, her heart beating faster. She knew what he was implying, and she couldn't deny that she felt the same pull toward him. But she was cautious, scarred by the upheaval of the past year, afraid to trust in anything that seemed too good to be true. They rode in silence for a while, but it was a comfortable silence, full of unspoken understanding. In town, people had begun to notice the Saturday morning rides. Mrs. Garrison had asked Penelope about Owen once, her eyes twinkling with matchmaking interest, but Penelope had deflected the questions. It was too new, too uncertain to put into words. The first real cold snap came in late October, bringing with it a reminder that winter in West Texas, while milder than Kansas, still had teeth. Penelope was preparing a lesson on American history when she heard shouting from outside the schoolhouse. She hurried to the door to find a group of townspeople gathered in the street, all looking toward the edge of town. Smoke was rising from one of the houses, dark and ominous. "Fire!" someone shouted. "The Cooper house is on fire!" Without thinking, Penelope ran toward the smoke, joining the bucket brigade that was already forming. The Cooper house was where one of her students, little Annie Cooper, lived with her parents and baby brother. She saw Mrs. Cooper standing in the street, her face streaked with tears, the baby in her arms. "Annie," Mrs. Cooper was sobbing. "She went back in for her doll. She's still inside." Penelope felt ice run through her veins. Without conscious thought, she broke from the bucket line and ran toward the house. Hands grabbed at her, voices shouted warnings, but she shook them off. She couldn't just stand there while a child was in danger. The heat hit her like a physical force as she pushed through the door. Smoke filled the interior, thick and choking. She dropped low, remembering something her father had once told her about smoke rising, and called out, "Annie! Annie, where are you?" A cough answered her, coming from somewhere deeper in the house. Penelope crawled forward, her eyes streaming, her lungs burning. She found Annie huddled in a corner of what must have been her bedroom, clutching a rag doll and coughing violently. "Come on, sweetheart," Penelope said, trying to keep her voice calm despite the fear clawing at her chest. "We need to go now." She grabbed Annie and half carried, half dragged her toward where she thought the door was. The smoke was so thick now she could barely see, and the heat was intense. She could hear the crackle of flames getting closer. Then suddenly there were hands grabbing them both, pulling them forward. Fresh air hit her face and she was outside, collapsing onto the hard, packed dirt of the street. Someone was coughing beside her. Annie. The child was alive. Penelope lay there gasping, her chest heaving, her body shaking with reaction. Faces swam above her, concerned voices asking if she was all right. She tried to answer but could only cough. Then Owen was there, kneeling beside her, his face pale and his eyes frantic. "Penelope, Penelope, can you hear me?" She managed a nod, reaching for his hand. He gripped it tightly, his other hand brushing her hair back from her face with a gentleness that contrasted with the fear in his expression. "What were you thinking?" he demanded, his voice rough. "You could have been killed." "Annie," she managed to croak, "couldn't leave her." "Stubborn, brave, foolish woman," he muttered, but there was something fierce and warm in his eyes. "Come on, let's get you to the doctor." He lifted her as if she weighed nothing, carrying her down the street while the bucket brigade continued their work behind them. The doctor's office was small but clean, and the doctor, an elderly man named Dr. Stevens, examined her thoroughly. "Smoke inhalation, some minor burns on your hands but nothing that won't heal," he pronounced. "You were lucky, young lady, very lucky." Owen stood in the corner the entire time, his arms crossed, his jaw tight. When the doctor finally left them alone for a moment, Owen moved to her side, taking the chair next to the examination table where she sat. "You scared me," he said quietly. "When I rode into town and saw the smoke, heard what you'd done, I thought." He stopped, swallowing hard. "I thought I might lose you before I ever had the chance to tell you how I feel." Penelope looked at him, her heart in her throat. "Owen, I know it's only been a couple of months," he continued, the words coming faster now as if he couldn't hold them back. "I know you came here to start over, to build your own life. But Penelope, I can't stop thinking about you. Every Saturday when I ride you out to the ranch, it's the best part of my week. Every conversation we have makes me want to know more about you. I've never felt this way about anyone before." "I feel the same," she whispered. "I've been afraid to admit it, even to myself. Everything in my life has been so uncertain lately. But you, the way I feel when I'm with you, that's the most certain thing I know." Owen reached up, cupping her face gently, mindful of her injuries. "Then let me court you properly. Let me show you that this is real, that we could have something good together." "Yes," she said simply. "Yes." He leaned forward and kissed her, soft and careful, a promise of more to come. When they pulled apart, Penelope felt tears on her cheeks, but they were good tears. Tears of relief and hope, and something that felt dangerously close to joy. The news of Penelope's rescue of Annie Cooper spread through Shafter like wildfire. By the next day, she was being hailed as a hero, much to her embarrassment. People stopped her on the street to thank her, students looked at her with awe, and Mrs. Cooper came to the boarding house with fresh baked bread and tears of gratitude. But more important than the attention was the change in her relationship with Owen. Now that they had acknowledged their feelings, they spent more time together. He came to town more frequently, finding excuses to stop by the schoolhouse or the boarding house. On Sundays after church, they went for walks, properly chaperoned by Mrs. Garrison or one of the other townswomen. It was on one of these Sunday walks in mid-November that Owen told her more about his past. They were walking along the creek that ran just outside town, the water low but still flowing, when Owen said, "There's something I should tell you about why I really left Missouri." Penelope waited, sensing the importance of what was coming. "I told you my father wanted me to take over the business, and that was true, but there was more to it. There was a woman, Emma. Our families assumed we would marry, had assumed it since we were children. She was nice enough, pretty, came from a good family. But I didn't love her, not in the way a man should love the woman he's going to spend his life with. When I told my father I wasn't going to marry her, wasn't going to stay, it caused a huge rift. He said I was throwing away everything he had built for me, that I was being selfish and foolish." "That must have been hard," Penelope said softly. "It was the hardest thing I'd ever done, up until then. Disappointing my parents, leaving my sisters, walking away from security. But I knew if I stayed, if I lived the life everyone expected me to live, I would suffocate. So I left and I came out here and I built a different kind of life." He stopped walking, turning to face her. "I'm telling you this because I want you to understand that when I say I choose to be with you, it's not a casual thing. I know what it means to choose your own path, even when it's hard. And I'm choosing you, Penelope. Not because I'm expected to, not because it's convenient, but because you're what I want." Penelope felt her eyes fill with tears. "I choose you too," she said. "After my father died, I felt like I was just drifting, letting life happen to me. But being here, teaching, being with you, it's the first time in a long time that I feel like I'm actively choosing my life instead of just surviving it." Owen pulled her into his arms, and she rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. They stood like that for a long time, while the creek babbled beside them, and the autumn sun warmed their shoulders. Winter settled over Shafter gradually, bringing cooler temperatures and occasional rain. The schoolhouse got a wood stove to keep the children warm, and Penelope's classroom became a cozy refuge from the wind that swept across the plains. Owen continued to court her with steady determination. He brought her small gifts, nothing extravagant, but things that showed he paid attention to who she was. A book of poetry because she had once mentioned loving Wordsworth. A warm shawl in a blue that matched her eyes. A set of colored pencils for her classroom. In return, she baked him cookies, mended his shirts when they tore, and listened when he needed to talk about troubles at the ranch or his ongoing correspondence with his family back in Missouri. It was in late December, just before Christmas, when everything changed. Owen had come to town to pick her up for their Saturday trip to the ranch when he seemed unusually nervous. He kept adjusting his hat, shifting his weight, clearing his throat. "Owen, what's wrong?" Penelope finally asked as they rode out of town. "Nothing's wrong," he said quickly. There's something I want to talk to you about, but maybe we should wait until we're at the ranch." Penelope's stomach fluttered with nerves and anticipation. She had a feeling she knew what was coming, and she wasn't sure if she was ready, even though her heart was already saying yes. The morning at the ranch went well. The children were excited about Christmas, chattering about what they hoped to receive and sharing stories about their family's traditions. Penelope managed to focus on the lesson, but her mind kept wandering to Owen and whatever he wanted to discuss. After lunch, instead of heading straight back to town, Owen suggested they take a different route, one that led to a small rise overlooking the ranch and the valley beyond. They dismounted at the top of the rise, and Owen spread a blanket he had brought in his saddlebag. They sat together, looking out over the landscape that had become so familiar to Penelope over the past months. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "I never get tired of this view." "Neither do I," Owen agreed, but when she glanced at him, he was looking at her, not the vista. He took her hand, his thumb rubbing gentle circles on her palm. "Penelope, I've been thinking about the future a lot lately, about what I want my life to look like, who I want to spend it with." Her heart began to race. "When you came to Shafter, I was just going through the motions, working hard but not really thinking beyond the next day, the next season. Then you stepped off that stage and everything shifted. Suddenly I was thinking about things I had pushed aside, things like having a home of my own, maybe a family someday, someone to share all of this with." He shifted, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a small velvet box. Penelope's breath caught. "I know we haven't been courting very long by most people's standards," Owen continued, his voice steady but his eyes betraying his nervousness. "But when you know, you know. And I know that I want to wake up next to you every morning. I want to listen to your stories about your students over dinner. I want to grow old with you on a porch somewhere, watching the sun set over these hills." He opened the box, revealing a simple gold ring with a small but lovely diamond. "Penelope Kincaid, will you marry me?" Penelope felt tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling so wide her cheeks hurt. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking. "Yes, Owen, yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly. Then he was kissing her, and she was kissing him back, and the whole world seemed to narrow down to just the two of them on that hilltop, beginning something new together. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless and grinning, Owen said, "I should warn you, being married to a ranch foreman isn't going to be easy. The hours are long, the pay is decent but not extravagant, and we'll be starting out in a small house on the ranch property." "I don't care about any of that," Penelope said honestly. "I care about you. Besides, I'll still be teaching, so we'll manage just fine." "About that," Owen said, "Mr. Robbins wanted me to ask you something. He's thinking about starting a proper school at the ranch for all the Hands children. There are more families than just the 3 you've been teaching and more coming all the time. He'd build a schoolhouse, pay you a full salary. You could teach there during the week, and we'd be close to each other all the time. But if you'd rather keep your position in town, I understand. I don't want you to give up what you've built. Penelope thought about this. She loved her students in town, but the idea of teaching at the ranch, of building something new, appealed to her. And being close to Owen every day instead of just Saturdays sounded wonderful. I'd want to finish out the school year in town, she said slowly. Give them time to find a replacement, but after that, yes, I'd love to teach at the ranch school. That sounds perfect, Owen agreed. Mr. Robbins wasn't expecting you to start right away anyway. He's thinking next fall, which would give time to build the schoolhouse and spread the word to the other families in the area. They talked for another hour about their plans, their hopes, their dreams. They decided on a spring wedding, April, when the wildflowers would be blooming and the weather would be pleasant. They discussed the house they would live in, the furniture they would need, how they would combine their lives. When they finally headed back to town, Penelope felt like she was floating. The ring on her finger caught the sunlight, sending little rainbows dancing across her riding gloves. Mrs. Garrison took one look at Penelope's face when they arrived back at the boarding house and immediately knew. "He asked you," she said, beaming. "He did. And you said yes." "I did." Mrs. Garrison pulled her into a warm hug. "I'm so happy for you, dear. Owen is a good man and you two are perfect for each other. When's the wedding?" "April," Penelope said, still feeling dazed by how quickly everything was changing. "We're thinking mid-April." The news spread through Shafter faster than fire through dry grass. By Monday morning, everyone knew that the teacher and the cowboy were engaged. Penelope's students were especially excited, the girls particularly interested in details about the dress and the flowers and everything else. The winter months passed in a flurry of preparation. Penelope continued teaching, but her evenings and Sundays were filled with wedding plans. Mrs. Garrison helped her order fabric for a dress from a catalog, and several of the women in town volunteered to help with the sewing. Owen's sisters sent letters of congratulation from Missouri, and to Penelope's surprise, his parents sent a generous gift of money along with a letter welcoming her to the family. "They've softened since I left," Owen explained when he showed her the letter. "I think having grandchildren from my sisters helped, and I've been writing more regularly, trying to mend things. This is their way of saying they approve, even if they wish I was closer." "Maybe we could visit them sometime," Penelope suggested. "After we're married, after things settle down." "I'd like that," Owen said, pulling her close. "I'd like them to know you, to see how happy you make me." The weeks leading up to the wedding seemed to both crawl and race by. Penelope trained her replacement, a young woman named Clara who had come from El Paso, making sure she understood each student's strengths and challenges. She packed up her belongings from the boarding house, sorting through what to keep and what to leave behind. Owen, meanwhile, was preparing their house on the ranch. It was a small structure, just 3 rooms, but he painted it inside and out, fixed the roof where it leaked, and built furniture in the evenings by lamplight. When he brought Penelope to see it a week before the wedding, she fell in love with it immediately. "It's perfect," she said, walking through the rooms and imagining their life there. The main room would serve as both kitchen and sitting area, with a fireplace for cooking and warmth. One bedroom for them, and a smaller room that could be used for storage or, someday, a nursery. "It's absolutely perfect." The wedding day arrived with clear skies and a gentle breeze that carried the scent of wildflowers across the plains. Penelope dressed in the boarding house with Mrs. Garrison's help, her gown of white muslin fitting perfectly. Her hair was arranged in soft curls with small flowers tucked into the arrangement. "You look beautiful," Mrs. Garrison said, wiping away tears. Like an absolute vision. The ceremony was held at the church, packed with townspeople and ranch hands, all of whom had come to celebrate. Penelope walked down the aisle alone, but she didn't feel alone. She felt supported by this community that had taken her in, embraced by the friendships she had built. And at the front of the church stood Owen, looking more handsome than she had ever seen him in a new suit, his hair neatly combed. His eyes locked on her with an expression of such love and devotion that she felt her throat tighten with emotion. The minister performed the ceremony, his words about love and commitment and partnership seeming especially meaningful. When it came time for the vows, Owen took her hands in his and spoke clearly. "Penelope, I vow to stand by your side through whatever comes. I vow to support your dreams and share your burdens. I vow to love you faithfully and honestly for all the days of my life." Penelope's voice shook slightly, but she held his gaze as she spoke her own vows. "Owen, I vow to be your partner and your friend. I vow to choose you every day, in good times and bad. I vow to love you with my whole heart for as long as we both shall live." When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Owen kissed her with such tenderness that it took her breath away. The congregation erupted in applause and cheers. The reception was held at the ranch, with tables set up under the open sky and food enough to feed twice the number of guests. There was music and dancing, stories and laughter. Penelope danced with Owen, with Mr. Robbins, with the ranch hands who had become friends. She talked with her students and their parents, with Mrs. Garrison and the other townspeople. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple, Owen pulled her aside, leading her away from the celebration to a quiet spot near their little house. "Happy?" he asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind as they looked out over the valley. "Incredibly," she said, leaning back against him. "Today was perfect. You're perfect." "I'm far from perfect," he said with a laugh, "but I promise to always try my best for you." They stood there in comfortable silence for a moment before Penelope said softly, "Why would you choose me?" Owen turned her in his arms so she was facing him, his expression serious. "What do you mean? I came here with nothing," she said. "No family, no connections, no dowry. I'm just a teacher with a few books and some clothes. There are other women in Shafter, women with more to offer. Why would you choose me?" Owen cupped her face in his hands, looking into her eyes with an intensity that made her heart race. "Because you're my only choice," he said simply. "From the moment I saw you step off that stage, looking lost but determined, something in me recognized something in you. You're brave and kind and smart. You ran into a burning building to save a child. You left everything familiar to start over in a place you'd never seen. You see the best in people, in those students you teach, in me." He kissed her forehead gently. "You could have been the wealthiest woman in Texas and I'd still choose you. You could have been a pauper with nothing but the dress on your back and I'd still choose you. Because it's not what you have that matters to me. It's who you are. And who you are is the woman I want to spend my life with. My only choice." Penelope felt tears sliding down her cheeks, but they were happy tears. She pulled Owen down for a kiss, pouring everything she felt into it, all her love and gratitude and hope for the future. When they finally returned to the celebration, hand in hand, the stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. The party continued late into the night, but eventually the guests began to depart, offering final congratulations and well wishes. Mrs. Garrison hugged Penelope tightly. "You take care of each other," she said. "And you come visit me in town regularly, you hear?" "I will," Penelope promised. "Thank you for everything, for taking me in, for being like a mother to me." "It was my pleasure, dear girl." Finally, it was just Owen and Penelope standing in the doorway of their little house. Owen lifted her over the threshold, both of them laughing at the tradition, and carried her inside. Their new life together had begun. The first months of marriage were an adjustment, but a happy one. Penelope continued teaching in town until the end of the school year in May, riding in with Owen each Monday morning and returning with him on Friday evenings. She loved coming home to their little house, to the domestic routines they were building together. Owen was a considerate husband, attentive and affectionate. He made sure she had firewood for cooking, brought her wildflowers just because, helped with chores without being asked. They talked in the evenings, sharing their days, making plans for the future. In June, construction began on the new school at the ranch. It was a larger building than the one in town, designed to accommodate up to 40 students. Owen took Penelope to see it regularly as it went up, beam by beam, wall by wall. "It's going to be wonderful," she said one evening as they walked through the partially completed structure. "A real school built right, with proper desks and good windows." "Mr. Robbins wants it to be something special," Owen said. "He's thinking long-term about the ranch being a place where families can settle and thrive. A good school is part of that." By August, the school was finished, and Penelope began preparing for her first term. Word had spread to other ranches in the area, and she had almost 30 students enrolled, ranging from age 6 to 15. She spent weeks developing lesson plans, organizing materials, setting up the classroom. The first day of school at the ranch was even better than she had hoped. The students were eager, their parents supportive, and the building itself was a dream to teach in. She could look out the window and see the ranch spread out before her, could see Owen occasionally riding past on ranch business, and the sense of home and purpose was overwhelming. Life fell into a comfortable rhythm. Teaching during the week, church and visiting on Sundays, quiet evenings at home. Owen was promoted again, becoming the ranch's general manager, which came with a raise in pay and more responsibility. They were able to save money, to buy nice things for their house, to feel secure in their future. In the spring of 1880, a year after their wedding, Penelope discovered she was pregnant. She was both thrilled and terrified, unsure how to balance teaching with motherhood, worried about the dangers of childbirth she had heard so many stories about. Owen, when she told him, picked her up and spun her around despite her laughing protests. "We're having a baby," he kept saying, his face split in the widest grin she had ever seen. "Penelope, we're going to be parents. Are you happy?" she asked, needing to hear it. "Happy doesn't begin to cover it," he said, setting her down gently and placing his hand on her still flat stomach. "This is everything I ever wanted." The pregnancy was relatively easy, for which Penelope was grateful. She was tired and occasionally nauseous in the first months, but by her second trimester, she felt wonderful. She continued teaching until August, when the growing swell of her belly made it difficult to move around the classroom comfortably. Clara, her replacement from the town school, agreed to fill in for a few months while Penelope focused on preparing for the baby. The women of the ranch and town threw her a lovely party, gifting her with blankets and clothes and all manner of things a baby would need. In late October, after a long night of labor that had Owen pacing the floor and praying, Penelope gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him Henry William Hartley, after Owen's father and Penelope's father, a gesture toward both their pasts and their future. Owen held his son with shaking hands, tears streaming down his face. "He's perfect," he whispered. "Absolutely perfect." Penelope, exhausted but elated, agreed. "He has your eyes. And your nose, thank goodness. Mine is too big." She laughed, which hurt, but she didn't care. They sat together, the three of them, as the sun rose over the ranch, beginning their new adventure as a family. The next few years passed in a blur of happiness and hard work. Henry grew from a baby into a toddler, then a little boy with his father's green eyes and his mother's dark blonde hair. He was curious and energetic, following Owen around the ranch when he could, helping Penelope in her schoolroom, loved by everyone who knew him. Penelope returned to teaching when Henry was 6 months old, bringing him to school with her. One of the older girls would watch him during lessons, and he napped in a cradle at the back of the room. As he grew older, he simply became part of the classroom, learning his letters and numbers alongside children twice his age. In 1883, their daughter Rose was born, named for Penelope's mother. She was quieter than Henry had been, more observant, with Owen's dark hair and Penelope's blue eyes. Owen doted on her shamelessly, declaring that she was going to be the most spoiled girl in all of Texas. Another son, James, came along in 1885, and their little house on the ranch began to feel cramped. Mr. Robbins, now elderly but still sharp, offered them a larger house closer to the main ranch buildings. It had 5 rooms, a real luxury, and a porch where they could sit in the evenings and watch their children play. Owen's relationship with his parents had continued to improve over the years. They had visited once when Henry was a baby, a slightly awkward but ultimately healing trip. Letters flew back and forth regularly now, and Penelope felt like she knew her in-laws even from a distance. Life wasn't without challenges. There were hard years when drought affected the cattle and money was tight. There were illnesses, injuries, the constant worries that came with raising children in a still wild land. But through it all, Penelope and Owen faced everything together, their partnership growing stronger with each passing year. One evening in the summer of 1887, when Henry was 6, Rose was 4, and James was 2, Penelope and Owen sat on their porch watching their children chase fireflies in the dusk. "You ever think about how different our lives could have been?" Penelope asked, leaning against Owen's shoulder. "Sometimes," Owen admitted. "I think about what would have happened if I'd stayed in Missouri, married Emma, taken over my father's store. I think I would have been miserable, always wondering what I'd missed. And I think about what would have happened if I hadn't gotten on that stage to Texas," Penelope said. "If I'd tried to stay in Kansas or gone somewhere else, I wouldn't have you, wouldn't have our children, wouldn't have this life." "You have any regrets?" Owen asked, turning to look at her. "Not a single one," she said honestly. "Every hard moment, every challenge, it was all worth it to get here to this life with you." Owen kissed her, tender and sweet, a kiss that still made her heart race even after years of marriage. "Same here," he said. "You're still my only choice, Penelope. Every single day." "And you're mine," she replied softly. They sat together as the stars came out, listening to their children's laughter, feeling the warm breeze and counting their blessings. In 1890, Mr. Robbins passed away peacefully in his sleep. He left the ranch to his nephew, but not before making provisions for Owen and Penelope. In his will, he granted them a portion of ranch land, 50 acres to do with as they pleased, and a substantial sum of money in gratitude for their years of faithful service. Owen was overwhelmed by the gesture. 50 acres, he kept saying. "That's enough to start our own spread if we wanted to." They discussed it at length. Owen loved his work at the Double R, but the idea of having their own ranch, something to pass on to their children, was appealing. Finally, they decided on a compromise. Owen would continue managing the Double R, but they would use their land to start a small cattle operation on the side, something Owen could work on in his spare time, and that Henry could learn from as he grew older. They hired a few hands to help with their own herd, built a small barn and additional corrals. It was hard work on top of their existing responsibilities, but it was also exciting, building something that was entirely theirs. Penelope continued teaching, now with almost 45 students from ranches all over the area. The school had become a point of pride for the community, with some of her former students going on to attend universities in San Antonio and Austin, something that would have been impossible without the education she provided. In 1892, when Penelope was 36 and Owen was 37, they welcomed their fourth and final child, a daughter they named Grace. She was a surprise, as they had thought their family was complete, but a welcome one. Henry, now 11, was old enough to help with the baby. Rose, at 9, was thrilled to have a little sister. And James, at 7, just shrugged and went back to playing with his wooden horses. As Grace grew, Penelope felt the particular bittersweet ache of knowing this was the last time she would experience these moments. The last first tooth, the last first word, the last baby in her arms, but she treasured every moment, knowing how precious they were. The years continued to pass, bringing changes but also continuity. Henry grew into a tall, capable young man who loved ranching as much as his father did. Rose developed a passion for teaching and began helping Penelope in the schoolroom. James was the adventurous one, always getting into scrapes, full of energy and mischief. And Grace, the baby, was sweet-natured and artistic, always drawing or making things with her hands. In 1900, as the new century dawned, Penelope and Owen sat on their porch on their 21st wedding anniversary. Henry was 19 and engaged to a lovely young woman from a neighboring ranch. Rose was 17 and planning to become a teacher herself. James was 15 and talking about seeing the world. Grace was 8 and currently asleep inside. 21 years, Owen mused. Sometimes it feels like just yesterday I saw you step off that stage, and sometimes it feels like you've been part of my life forever. I know what you mean, Penelope said. She was 44 now, with a few gray hairs and lines around her eyes, but Owen insisted she was more beautiful than ever. He had gray in his hair too, and his face was deeply weathered from years under the sun, but to her, he was just as handsome as the day they met. You remember what you asked me on our wedding day, Owen said. Why would I choose you? I remember, Penelope said softly. Do you remember what I answered? You said I was your only choice. That's still true, Owen said, taking her hand and raising it to his lips. After all these years, all these experiences, everything we've been through together, you're still my only choice. You always will be. Penelope felt tears prick her eyes, the good kind of tears. And you're mine, she said. Always. They sat together in the peaceful evening, looking out over the land that had become their home, listening to the sounds of the ranch settling down for the night. Their children were healthy and happy. Their marriage was strong. Their life together had been more than either of them could have imagined that day when she stepped off the stage in Shafter. Penelope thought back to that frightened young woman who had arrived in Texas with nothing but a carpet bag and a hope. She thought about the cowboy who had helped her, who had seen something in her worth choosing. She thought about the life they had built together, brick by brick, moment by moment, choice by choice. It hadn't always been easy. There had been hard times, sad times, challenging times, but there had also been joy and laughter and love in abundance. And through it all, they had chosen each other, every single day. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Penelope rested her head on Owen's shoulder, feeling his arm come around her, solid and sure. This was home. This was love. This was the life she had chosen and been chosen for. And it was more than enough. It was everything. In the following years, their family continued to grow and change. Henry married his sweetheart, Emily, in a beautiful ceremony at the ranch in the spring of 1901. They built a house on the far corner of Owen and Penelope's 50 acres, close enough to be family but far enough to have their own space. In 1902, they made Owen and Penelope grandparents for the first time with the birth of a son they named Owen Henry, after both grandfathers. Holding her grandson for the first time, Penelope felt the circle of life complete itself in a profound way. Here was a new generation, born into the life that she and Owen had built. This little boy would grow up knowing the security and love that she had once thought lost to her forever. Rose did indeed become a teacher, taking over the ranch school when Penelope finally retired in 1903 at the age of 47. It was hard to step away from the work she had loved for so long, but Penelope knew it was time. Her body ached more than it used to, and she wanted time to enjoy her grandchildren and help Owen with their growing cattle operation. James, true to his wandering spirit, left Texas in 1904 to work on ranches across the West. He wrote regularly, his letters full of adventures in Montana, Wyoming, and Colorado. While Penelope worried about him, she understood his need to see the world to make his own path. He was, after all, his parents' son. Grace, at 12, was already showing signs of being an artist. Her drawings covered the walls of the house, detailed sketches of horses and cattle, landscapes and people. Owen had commissioned a painter passing through to give her some lessons, and she absorbed everything like a sponge. In 1905, when Penelope turned 49 and Owen 50, they decided to take a trip. They traveled to Missouri to visit Owen's family, something they had talked about for years but never quite managed to do. Owen's parents were elderly now, his mother frail and his father using a cane, but there was such joy in the reunion. "I'm sorry I stayed away so long," Owen said to his father one evening as they sat on the porch of the family home. "You lived your life the way you needed to," his father replied, his voice creaky with age. "I didn't understand it then, but I do now, and you've done well, son, better than well. You've built a good life." "I have," Owen agreed, "thanks in no small part to this woman here." He drew Penelope close. "Father, Mother, I want you to know that I've never regretted leaving, not because I didn't love you, but because staying would have meant missing out on the life I was meant to live." "We know," his mother said softly, "and we're proud of you, both of you." They spent 2 weeks in Missouri, reconnecting with Owen's sisters and meeting nieces and nephews they had only known through letters. It was bittersweet, seeing what Owen had left behind, but also affirming. This visit was closure of a sort, a healing of old wounds, but it also made clear that Texas was their home now, completely and without reservation. Returning to the ranch felt like exhaling after holding their breath. The familiar landscape, the warm greetings from ranch hands and neighbors, their children running out to meet them. It was all exactly right. In 1907, Rose married a young teacher who had come to work at one of the other area schools. They had a small, sweet wedding, and Penelope cried happy tears seeing her daughter so in love, so full of hope, just as she had been at that age. Henry and Emily welcomed a second child, a daughter named Penelope Emily, in 1908. Then in 1910, Rose gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl she named Samuel and Sarah. The ranch was full of children again, grandchildren running around, filling the air with laughter and noise. James came home in 1909, bringing with him a wife he had met in Colorado, a spirited young woman named Catherine who was the daughter of a rancher. They settled on a piece of Henry's land, building a small house and starting their own herd. It was good to have all their children close again, even if they knew it might not last forever. Grace, at 18, announced in 1910 that she wanted to attend an art school in San Antonio. It was a bold move for a young woman, but Owen and Penelope had always encouraged their children to follow their passions. They arranged for her to live with a respectable family in the city and enrolled her in the school, sending her off with tears and blessings. The years rolled on, bringing the usual mix of joy and sorrow. Owen's parents both passed within a year of each other in 1911 and 1912, leaving Owen as the patriarch of his family. Penelope's teaching position had been given to a succession of younger teachers, but the school still bore a plaque dedicating it to Penelope Hartley, founder, in recognition of her years of service. In 1915, as Penelope turned 59 and Owen 60, they took stock of their lives. Their cattle operation was thriving, with Henry managing most of the day-to-day operations now. They had 4 children, all healthy and happy, 3 of them married with children of their own. They had 8 grandchildren in total, with more on the way. But more than that, they had each other, their partnership as strong as ever. They still sat on their porch most evenings, talking about the day, making plans for the future, simply enjoying each other's company. They still held hands when they walked. Owen still brought Penelope wildflowers. She still mended his shirts and baked his favorite cookies. "We've had a good run," Owen said one evening, not sad but reflective. "We're not done yet," Penelope replied with a laugh. "We've got years ahead of us still." "I certainly hope so," Owen agreed. "I'm looking forward to spoiling a whole lot more grandchildren." Grace came home in 1916 with a portfolio of stunning artwork and a plan to open a small gallery and teaching studio in Shafter. The town had grown over the years, with a population now of over 500, and there was interest in culture and the arts. Owen and Penelope helped her finance the endeavor, and it became a surprising success, with people coming from other towns to see her exhibitions and take her classes. In 1918, the world was overshadowed by the Great War raging in Europe, but it felt far away from their Texas ranch. Still, they worried about the young men from the area who had enlisted, and they did their part to support the war effort from home. James and Catherine welcomed their 3rd child that year, while Henry and Emily celebrated their 5th. Rose's twins were 8 years old, full of energy and curiosity. The ranch was a loud, chaotic, wonderful place, full of the next generation. Owen retired from his position as manager of the Double R in 1920 at the age of 65, turning over the reins to a younger man, but staying on as a consultant. He spent more time with their own cattle operation, teaching his grandsons the things he had learned over a lifetime of ranching. Penelope, at 64, slowed down as well. She still helped Rose occasionally at the school, guest teaching or telling stories to the youngest children. But mostly she focused on her home, her family, the life she and Owen had built. They celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary in April of 1920, with a huge party that seemed to include half of West Texas. Their children organized it, their grandchildren decorated, and their friends and extended family came from far and wide. During the party, Henry stood up to give a toast. "To my parents," he said, his voice carrying over the crowd. "You've shown us what it means to build a life together, to choose each other every day, to create something lasting. Everything we have, everything we are, started with the 2 of you. Thank you for giving us such a strong foundation." There wasn't a dry eye in the place, least of all Penelope's and Owen's. Later that night, back in their house with just the 2 of them, Owen and Penelope sat on their porch as they had done thousands of times before. 40 years, Penelope mused. "It's gone so fast." "Best 40 years of my life," Owen said. "No question." Penelope looked at her husband, seeing the man she had fallen in love with still there beneath the gray hair and weathered skin. "Do you remember that first day when you helped me find Mrs. Garrison's boarding house?" "Like it was yesterday," Owen said. "I took one look at you and thought, that woman is going to change my life, and I was right." "I thought you were kind," Penelope said. "That was my first impression. Just a kind man helping a stranger. I had no idea you would become my whole world." "Why would you choose me?" Owen said softly, echoing that long-ago question. "That's what you asked on our wedding day. And you said I was your only choice," Penelope finished. "It's still my favorite thing you've ever said to me." "It was true then, and it's true now," Owen said. "You want to know something? Every morning when I wake up and see you next to me, I feel like the luckiest man alive. Every single morning for 40 years. Penelope leaned over and kissed him, soft and sweet. "I love you, Owen Hartley." "I love you too, Penelope Hartley. Always have, always will." They sat together under the stars, holding hands, listening to the sounds of the ranch, the night, the life they had built. In the house behind them, photographs chronicled their journey. Their wedding day, the birth of each child, Christmas mornings and summer afternoons. Moments big and small, all adding up to a lifetime. Penelope thought about that frightened young woman who had stepped off a stagecoach in Shafter, Texas, 42 years ago, alone and uncertain. She thought about the cowboy who had seen something in her, who had chosen her when she had nothing to offer but herself. She thought about the question she had asked, doubting that she could be enough, and his answer that had changed everything. "Because you're my only choice." Those words had been a promise, and Owen had kept that promise every day since. Through good times and hard times, through raising children and building a life, through everything the years had brought, he had chosen her. And she had chosen him right back. As the moon rose over the Texas landscape, Penelope Hartley felt a deep, abiding contentment. This was what happiness looked like. Not perfect, not without its challenges, but real and true and lasting. A life built on love, on choice, on partnership. She squeezed Owen's hand, and he squeezed back, and they sat together in comfortable silence. Two people who had become one through years and love and unwavering commitment. Their story had started with a chance encounter on a dusty street in a small Texas town. It had grown into something neither of them could have imagined, something beautiful and lasting and true. And as they sat there under the stars, surrounded by the evidence of the life they had built together, Penelope knew with absolute certainty that every choice she had made, every step that had led her here, had been exactly right. She was exactly where she was meant to be, with exactly who she was meant to be with. She was home. And they lived out the rest of their days in that same contentment, surrounded by children and grandchildren, and eventually great-grandchildren, their love story becoming the foundation upon which generations would build their own lives. Owen passed peacefully in his sleep at the age of 79, with Penelope holding his hand. She followed him just 2 years later at 77, and they were buried side by side on the ranch they had loved, under the vast Texas sky that had witnessed their love story. Their children and grandchildren would tell the story for years to come, of the teacher who came to Texas with nothing and the cowboy who chose her, of the love they built and the legacy they left. It was a story of courage and choice, of finding home in unexpected places and building a life worth living. It was, in the end, a story about how sometimes the most important question we can ask is why someone would choose us, and how the most important answer is that they do, simply and completely, because we are their only choice, just as they are ours. And that, more than anything else, was what made it a love story worth remembering.